After my husband died, he left me with his $12 million estate. His daughter sued me, calling me a gold digger. She hired a top firm. Hi, welcome to my channel. I have a new story for you today.
After my husband passed away, he left his entire $12 million estate to me. His daughter sued me immediately, calling me a gold digger, a manipulative old woman. She hired a top-tier law firm to crush me in court. I showed up alone. No lawyer. No way to fight $1 million legal team. Just the will and the truth. But when the judge asked for my full name, every eye in the courtroom turned to me, not because I was weak, but because with just one answer, their entire plan began to crack, and the one who was certain to win was the first to panic. I truly appreciate you being here with me. Before we continue, take a moment to comment where you're watching from. I'd love to see who's part of this journey. This story includes some dramatized elements for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental, but the message shared here may still resonate. They say at 63 you should know who you are. You should have it all figured out, the wrinkles earned, the battles, fought the quiet certainty that comes with age. But as I sat in the sunroom of our Pacific Heights home on that sweltering August morning, holding a stack of legal papers that might as well have been a death sentence, I realized I'd never felt more lost in my life. 8 months. It had only been 8 months since I'd lost William. I could still see him everywhere standing by the kitchen island with his reading glasses, the indent his body had left on his favorite chair, the faint scent of his cologne in our closet. William Thomas Bennett had passed away on January 15th of this year. The doctors had given us 6 months when they diagnosed the cancer, but my stubborn, loving husband had fought for 7. I need to make sure you're taken care of, he'd whispered in the hospital, his hand trembling in mine. Promise me you'll be okay. I'd promised. But now holding these papers, I wondered if I'd lied. The funeral had been a blur. Hundreds of faces hollow condolences, our daughter standing beside me with her carefully masked grief. Olivia Claire Bennett, 34 years old. The baby I'd brought into this world on a rainy September morning in 1989. The little girl who'd once called me Mama in that breathless way children do. The daughter I'd given up everything for, and now she wanted to destroy me. I looked down at the papers, my hands trembling. Complaint for invalidation of Will Superior Court of California County of San Francisco. Olivia Claire Bennett versus Diana Frances Bennett. My own daughter. Suing me. Certain phrases leaped out like daggers. Undue influence. Gold digger. Uneducated housewife who manipulated a vulnerable man. Estate valued at $12,300,000. $12.3 million. That's what William's life had become. That's what our 43 years of marriage, of building a life together from nothing of quiet Sunday mornings and whispered promises, had become in our daughter's eyes. A transaction. A crime. I met William in the fall of 1980. I was barely 20, fresh out of college, with big dreams and empty pockets. He was 22, a junior programmer at a struggling startup. We'd bumped into each other at a Mission District coffee shop. He'd spilled his drink all over my textbooks. "Let me buy you another coffee," he'd said, those kind eyes apologetic. "And maybe dinner to make up for your books." We married 2 years later at City Hall with pizza afterward because that's all we could afford. His startup was struggling. I was working 2 jobs to pay rent on our tiny apartment. But we were happy. God, we were so happy. In 1989, Olivia was born. I still remembered holding her for the first time, that tiny bundle with her fist curled against my chest. "She has your determination already," William had whispered. "Look at that grip." For years, I juggled everything: my demanding career, late-night feedings, the beautiful chaos of motherhood. William's company was finally taking off, and somebody had to keep things running at home. Most nights, it was just me and our baby girl. But by the time Olivia turned 13 in 2002, I saw the cracks forming. She was pulling away, and there was something deeper than typical teenage rebellion. "You're never here," she'd said one night, her voice small and accusing. "You care more about your job than me." That conversation shattered me, so I made a choice. I walked away from the career I'd spent over a decade building. I retired that year to be the mother I thought she needed, to be present, to prove she mattered more than anything. "Are you sure?" William had asked, concerned. "You've worked so hard." "She's our daughter," I'd told him, believing every word. "She needs me." I thought it would fix everything. I thought Olivia would finally see how much I loved her, how much I was willing to sacrifice. But no matter what I did, no matter how many soccer games I attended, how many times I was there when she came home, it was never enough. She still looked at me with cold eyes as if I were a stranger. Now I understood. In Olivia's eyes, I'd never been enough. The complaint went on for 12 pages, each more venomous than the last. It claimed I'd contributed nothing to the marriage, that I'd lived off William's success like a parasite, that I was an uneducated housewife with no skills, no career, no value beyond what she could extract from a successful man. The cruelty stole my breath. But here was the crushing reality: the entire estate was frozen. Every asset, every account, everything William had left me was locked pending this lawsuit. I couldn't touch the house. I couldn't access our investments. My own savings amounted to maybe $20,000. Enough to survive a few months, not nearly enough to hire a good attorney, because Olivia had resources. Her attorney, Marcus Alexander Caldwell of Caldwell, and Associates, one of the most expensive firms in the city. His rate probably started at $500 an hour. The trial date stared up at me from page 12, September 15th, 2025. 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to prepare a defense against my own daughter. 6 weeks to somehow prove that the life I'd lived, the sacrifices I'd made, weren't a lie. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know where to begin. My vision blurred with tears, and I almost crumpled the papers in frustration. But then something slipped out, a small piece of notepaper in William's unmistakable handwriting. My breath caught. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. "You're stronger than you think you are, Diana. Remember that." The tears came fierce and hot, but beneath the grief, something else stirred. Something I hadn't felt since that terrible night William had slipped away his hand, going slack in mine, while I begged him not to leave. Anger. Not the wild, destructive kind. The cold, clear kind. The kind that sharpens your focus and straightens your spine. Olivia wanted a war fine. I set the papers down and stood my reflection staring back from the sunroom windows, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen far more than anyone would know. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have a plan. But when I looked at William's note again, something fierce ignited in my chest. If Olivia wanted to fight, I'd give her exactly what she was asking for. Not because of the money, not even because of this house or the life William and I had built, but because I would not let her rewrite the truth of what we'd been to each other. I would not let her turn 43 years of love into something ugly and transactional. The trial was 6 weeks away, and I was done being the victim in someone else's story. A week later, I woke to the sound of my doorbell ringing like an alarm I couldn't silence. It was barely 7 in the morning. For a split second, still foggy with sleep, I thought maybe it was a delivery. William used to order books online all the time, and sometimes I'd forget he was gone and expect packages that would never come. But then the doorbell rang again, and voices, loud, aggressive voices, started shouting from outside. "Mrs. Bennett. Mrs. Bennett, can you comment on your daughter's lawsuit? Diana, is it true you manipulated your husband? How does it feel to be called a gold digger?" My blood went cold. I stumbled out of bed and rushed to the front window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see. My stomach dropped. There were at least 10 of them, maybe more. Photographers with enormous cameras, reporters with microphones, all crowded on my front steps and spilling onto the sidewalk. Flashes went off like lightning strikes as they took pictures of my house, of my windows, of anything they could capture. I let the curtain fall and backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. How did they know? How did they find out so fast? The doorbell wouldn't stop. The shouting got louder. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and considered calling the police, but what would I even say? They weren't breaking any laws. They were just... They're waiting, watching. I was trapped in my own home. By noon, I'd learned exactly how they'd found out. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, from across the street, had knocked on my back door looking worried. "Diana, have you seen the newspaper?" she'd asked, holding up a copy of the San Francisco Chronicle. The headline hit me like a punch to the gut. $12.3 million inheritance lawsuit rocks Pacific Heights daughter claims stepmother manipulated dying tech mogul. Stepmother. They'd called me her stepmother, as if Olivia wasn't the baby I'd carried for 9 months, the child I'd given birth to, the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for. The article was brutal. The reporter, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, had painted me as a predator. Every sentence was designed to make me look guilty. Mrs. Bennett, a housewife with no independent income and no college degree, stands to inherit the entire estate. Sources close to the family describe her as controlling and manipulative. Neighbors report she isolated Mr. Bennett in his final months. Sources close to the family. Olivia. It had to be Olivia. She'd gone to the press. She'd given them this story, these lies, and now the entire city thought they knew who I was. But the newspaper was just the beginning. By that evening, it had spread online like wildfire. I made the mistake of searching my own name on my laptop, and what I found made me physically sick. Someone had found Olivia's social media accounts and shared them everywhere. She'd posted an old photo of herself with William, one from maybe 5 years ago, both of them smiling at some company event with a caption that made my hands shake. Missing you every day, Dad. Justice will be served. Hashtag justice for Dad. Hashtag family betrayal. The comments underneath were vicious. Hundreds of them. Thousands, maybe. That gold digger should be in jail. Poor girl losing her father and then having to fight for what's rightfully hers. This is elder abuse, disgusting. I hope she loses everything. People who'd never met me, who knew nothing about my life or my marriage, or the 43 years William and I had spent together, they'd all decided I was guilty. They'd tried me, convicted me, and sentenced me in the court of public opinion without a single fact beyond what they'd read in one biased article. The hashtags were everywhere. Hashtag justice for Olivia, hashtag Bennett, inheritance scandal. By midnight, there were over 15,000 posts. My face, pulled from some charity gala photo from years ago, was being shared and mocked and torn apart by complete strangers. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. I'd turned off my voicemail after the first dozen messages because they were all the same reporters asking for comments, TV stations wanting interviews, blocked numbers leaving messages that ranged from accusatory to downright threatening. Finally, I just unplugged it, pulled the cord right out of the wall. But that didn't stop the letters. They started arriving the next day. Hand-delivered, slipped through my mail slot. Most were unsigned. Anonymous hatred from people who felt entitled to judge me. You should be ashamed of yourself. We know where you live. You won't get away with this. Gold-digging witch. I called the police. They came, took a report, told me to stay vigilant and let them know if anything escalated. But what did that even mean? What counted as escalation? The officer had been polite but clearly skeptical, as if I were wasting his time, as if maybe I deserved this. I couldn't stay in the house. I needed groceries, needed to get out, needed to feel like a normal person for just 1 hour. So 2 days after the article ran, I put on sunglasses and a hat like some kind of criminal trying to hide and drove to Whole Foods. It was a mistake. The paparazzi followed me. 3 cars tailing mine through the streets of San Francisco. Cameras pointed at me through their windows like weapons. When I parked, they swarmed. I had to push through them to get into the store, their questions pelting me like stones. Inside wasn't any better. People recognized me. I saw the way they stared, the way they whispered to each other and pulled out their phones to take pictures. A woman actually came up to me in the produce section and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You should be ashamed of yourself, that poor girl." I abandoned my cart and left. Drove home with tears streaming down my face while photographers chased me the entire way. I tried Starbucks the next day. The barista was cold when she took my order, and I swear she made me wait longer than everyone else. When I finally got my coffee, someone had written on the cup in permanent marker, "Gold Digger." My hair salon, where I'd been going for 8 years, suddenly claimed they were fully booked for the next 3 months when I called to make an appointment. The receptionist's voice had been stiff, uncomfortable. She knew who I was. Everyone knew who I was now. I was being erased from my own life. My community, my neighborhood, the city I'd lived in for decades, it was all turning against me because of a story they'd read. A story Olivia had fed them. That night, my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I knew by heart. Olivia's number. The daughter I'd carried, raised, loved. "You think you can keep my father's money? You're going to pay for what you've done." I stared at those words until they blurred. This was my daughter, my baby girl, and she was destroying me. In 48 hours, I'd gone from a grieving widow to public enemy number one. Olivia was winning this battle before we'd ever set foot in a courtroom. She was dismantling my life piece by piece, turning everyone against me, making sure that even if I somehow survived the trial, there'd be nothing left to come back to. And I had no idea how to fight back. 3 days later, I saw Mrs. Dorothy Parker crossing the street, literally crossing to the other side to avoid me. Dorothy had been my neighbor for 8 years. We'd shared coffee on her porch dozens of times, exchanged Christmas cookies, complained about the noise from the construction down the block. When William got sick, she'd brought me casseroles and sat with me when I couldn't stop crying. She'd hugged me at his funeral and told me she'd always be there if I needed anything. Now she was pretending she didn't see me. I was walking back from checking my mailbox, more threatening letters, more strangers telling me I deserved to lose everything when I spotted her coming down the sidewalk. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw the recognition there. But then she looked away, stepped off the curb, and crossed to the opposite sidewalk without a word. "Dorothy," I called out, my voice cracking. "Dorothy, wait!" She stopped, turned slowly. Her face was carefully blank, the way you'd look at a stranger who'd asked you for directions. Not the way you'd look at someone you'd known for nearly a decade. "I'm sorry, Diana," and she said, her tone formal and cold. "I really need to get home." "Please." I crossed the street toward her, desperate. "I know you read the article, but it's not true. None of it is true. Olivia is lying. I remember our conversation." Dorothy interrupted, her voice sharp. "Last November, you were standing on my porch and you told me you were worried about what would happen when William passed away. You said you were scared about the inheritance." My stomach dropped. No, that's not what I meant. I said I was scared of being alone, of losing him, not about money. That's not how I remember it. Dorothy's eyes were hard. "And frankly, Diana, I think the article paints a pretty clear picture. I'm sorry, but I can't be associated with someone who—" She stopped herself, shook her head. "I have to go." She walked away, leaving me standing alone on the street corner like a beggar who'd been turned away. That was just the beginning. 2 days later, I received a phone call from Margaret Steinberg, the president of the Pacific Heights Charitable Foundation, a group I'd been part of for 15 years. We met at the country club, a place I'd attended countless luncheons and fundraisers over the years. Margaret was waiting in one of the private meeting rooms, her expression professional but distant. "Diana, thank you for coming," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I'll get straight to the point. The board has asked me to speak with you about your involvement with the foundation." I felt my chest tighten. "My involvement? Given the recent publicity surrounding your situation, we feel it's best if you step back from your position. Temporarily, of course, just until this legal matter is resolved." "You're asking me to leave?" My voice came out small, broken. Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "It's not personal, Diana, but you understand the optics. Several of our major donors have expressed concerns. They're worried about being associated with—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "With someone involved in this type of controversy. I've raised $4.2 million for this foundation over 15 years. I said, my voice shaking. $4.2 million. I've organized galas, sat on committees given my time, and we're grateful for that, Margaret said, but her tone suggested otherwise. But until this is resolved, we think it's best. For everyone. She didn't wait for my response, just stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked me to the door like I was a problem she'd successfully handled. As I left, I heard whispers behind me, other board members who'd watched the whole thing. People I'd worked beside for years now treating me like I was contagious. The isolation spread like poison through every corner of my life. At Whole Foods, people stared openly and took pictures with their phones. A woman I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood stopped me in the dairy aisle to say loud enough for everyone to hear, "You should be ashamed of yourself." That poor girl losing her father and then having to fight you for what's rightfully hers. I abandoned my groceries and left tears burning my eyes. At Starbucks, the barista, a young woman who'd always been friendly, served me with cold efficiency and wouldn't meet my eyes. When I tried to make small talk, she turned away without responding. The other customers whispered and pointed. I took my coffee and left before I could break down in public. My hair salon called to cancel my standing appointment. "We're booked solid," the receptionist said, though I could hear the lie in her voice. The gym I'd been a member of for 12 years suddenly found irregularities with my membership and suggested I might be more comfortable at a different location. The Italian restaurant where William and I had celebrated our anniversary every year told me they were fully reserved when I tried to make a reservation. Then I drove past that same evening and saw empty tables through the windows. Every door was closing. Every familiar face was turning away. My entire community, the life I'd built over decades, was systematically erasing me. The threatening letters kept coming. Anonymous people who felt entitled to punish me based on one newspaper article. "You don't deserve that money. Everyone knows what you really are. You'll get what's coming to you." My phone, which had once rung constantly with calls from friends, stayed silent. Lunch dates were canceled with vague excuses. Invitations to book clubs stopped coming. Even people who'd been at my house just months ago for William's wake were suddenly too busy to return my calls. I was being deleted from my own life. One evening, I found myself wandering through our house, my house now like a ghost. Every room held memories that felt both precious and painful. The kitchen where William used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. The living room where we'd watched old movies together. The bedroom where I'd held him during those final, terrible nights. I ended up in his study, surrounded by his books and his things. His reading glasses were still on the desk where he'd left them. His favorite cardigan was draped over the back of his chair. I could still smell his cologne faintly in the air, or maybe I was just imagining it. I poured myself a glass of his Merlot, a bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion that would never come, and sat in his chair. The leather still held the shape of him. "I need you," I whispered to the empty room. "I don't know how to fight this. I don't know how to do any of this without you." But William was gone and I was alone. My phone buzzed with a text message. Olivia, of course. Always Olivia twisting the knife. "See you in court. You're going to lose everything, just like you deserve." I stared at those words until they blurred the wine glass trembling in my hand. I sat alone in a house full of ghosts, my reputation destroyed, my community gone. My daughter convinced I was a monster, and for the first time since William passed away, I wondered, what was the point of fighting? What was I even fighting for? But then my eyes landed on the photograph on William's desk, one I'd taken of him maybe 2 years ago standing in our garden with that smile that had always made me feel safe. Those kind, patient eyes that had looked at me with such love for 43 years. And I knew the point was the truth. Not the truth Olivia was selling to the newspapers, not the truth strangers had decided about me based on headlines, but the real truth, the life William and I had actually lived, the love we'd actually shared, the sacrifices I'd actually made. I might lose everything else, but I wouldn't let them take that. A week before the trial, I woke at 2 a.m. and knew I wouldn't sleep again. The nightmare was always the same, standing in a courtroom while strangers pointed and laughed, while Olivia smiled from the witness stand, while the judge declared me guilty. I always woke gasping William's side of the bed cold and empty. Tonight I couldn't lie there anymore. I pulled on my robe and wandered through the house like a ghost. Every room felt like a museum dedicated to people who no longer existed. My feet carried me to William's study without conscious thought. I'd been avoiding this room, it hurt too much. But tonight, something pulled me through the doorway. His reading glasses on the desk, his favorite pen, and everywhere law books, shelves and shelves of them, their spines cracked from decades of use. I ran my fingers along the leather bindings, contracts, evidence, constitutional law. My hand paused and I felt something stir, a strange familiarity. "I used to understand these books," I whispered, but that didn't make sense. Moonlight streamed through the window, catching something metal, a keyhole, on the bottom drawer. the one that had always been locked. Suddenly I remembered. William, maybe 5 years ago, pressing something into my palm. "Keep this safe," he'd said, "for when you need to remember who you really are." I went to my jewelry box. Tucked beneath my wedding rings was a small brass key. Back in the study, I knelt before the drawer, my heart pounding. The key turned smoothly. Inside was a single manila folder, Diana Personal. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The first thing I saw was a diploma. Harvard Law School, Juris Doctor, Diana Frances Caldwell, summa cum laude, class of 1986. I stared at my maiden name. I didn't go to Harvard, did I? Beneath it, newspaper clippings, dozens of them. Diana Caldwell, 30, becomes youngest Superior Court judge in state history. The Iron Judge, how Diana Caldwell is changing the face of justice. And photographs. Me in black judicial robes sitting behind a bench, my expression commanding. Me shaking hands with the governor. Me looking powerful and certain and nothing like the woman I'd become. This couldn't be real, but then I found the letter. My dearest Diana, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're fighting the battle I knew was coming. I'm sorry I won't be there. But you don't need me. You never did. I know you sacrificed everything when you chose us. You walked away from the bench, from the Ninth Circuit nomination, from a career that was changing the legal landscape. You did it because Olivia needed you, because she was struggling, and because you loved her more than your ambitions. Your talents were never wasted. They were just sleeping, waiting for when you'd need them again. You thought you were just a housewife. You thought you'd become small. But Diana, you were never small. You were always brilliant, always strong. You just chose to move mountains for us instead of for the world. Don't let anyone convince you those years were wasted. But now it's time to wake up. Remember who you are and fight. All my love, W. I was crying so hard I could barely breathe because it was coming back now, all of it. Law school, my first case, the bar exam, my swearing-in ceremony as a Superior Court judge at 30 years old, the youngest in state history. 12 years of brilliant, challenging work, cases that changed lives, rulings that set precedents, the respect, the power. And then Olivia, my 13-year-old daughter, crying, screaming that I was never home. The Ninth Circuit nomination arriving the same week. The choice, federal judgeship, or my daughter. I'd chosen Olivia, resigned from the bench, walked away from everything, and then spent 20 years trying so hard to be what she needed that I'd forgotten who I used to be. I pulled out more documents, legal opinions I'd written, awards, letters calling me brilliant, incorruptible, one of the finest legal minds of her generation. At the bottom was another envelope, email printouts between William and someone named Emily Watson dated from the past 2 years. Emily Watson, Olivia's former Stanford roommate. They'd been best friends until some falling out. William had been corresponding with her, worried about our daughter. "Emily, I'm concerned about Olivia. If anything happens to me, please help Diana understand what Olivia's been through." Emily's response explained things I'd never known: how Olivia felt living in my shadow, how she'd failed the bar exam twice, how everyone expected her to be like me. I saved Emily's email address. I didn't know if she'd help, but William had trusted her. I returned to the legal documents. As I read through my old court opinions, something was happening. Pathways dormant for 20 years were lighting up. Legal concepts buried under years of PTA meetings were surfacing with startling clarity. I remembered how to read case law, how to construct arguments, how to cross-examine witnesses. I'd spent the past month feeling helpless, but that was the housewife responding. Judge Caldwell knew better. I stood and pulled volumes from the shelves. Evidence, civil procedure, case precedents on undue influence. I'd have to represent myself, no money for an attorney, but maybe I didn't need one. As the night wore on, I took notes. My handwriting started shaky, then became confident, precise. Legal terminology came back like muscle memory. I built a defense strategy, identified holes in Olivia's case, planned cross-examinations. By sunrise, I'd been awake 20 hours. My eyes were red, my hair a disaster, still in my bathrobe. But when I caught my reflection in the window, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Her, Judge Diana Caldwell, The woman who'd never lost a case in 12 years. The woman lawyers called the Iron Judge because she was brilliant and uncompromising. The woman who'd given up everything to be a mother but had never stopped being herself. She'd just been sleeping. Olivia thought she was suing a helpless widow, someone she could easily crush. She had no idea who she was really up against. I closed the folder but didn't put it back. I needed these documents. The reminder of who I'd been, who I still was. The trial was a week away. 7 days to prepare. 7 days to wake up fully, to remember everything, to become the person I needed to be. I looked at William's photograph. "Thank you," I whispered, "for saving this, for knowing I'd need it." He'd known all along. That's why he'd kept everything, given me the key. For when you need to remember who you really are. Now I remembered. I was Diana Frances Caldwell Bennett, mother, widow, and judge. My daughter had made a terrible miscalculation. She'd backed me into a corner, destroyed my reputation, assumed I'd simply crumble. But you don't corner a judge. You don't destroy someone who spent 12 years fighting for justice. You don't crush someone who knows exactly how the law works because she used to interpret it. As dawn filtered through the windows, I felt it. Not just determination. Power. The power that comes from knowing exactly who you are. The power I'd set aside for 20 years because I thought being a mother meant making myself smaller. But William had known better. He'd known I could be both. I gathered my notes, my old case files, the documents. I had a week to build my defense, a week to transform from victim into advocate. By dawn, I'd read through case precedents. My old legal mind was waking up synapses firing that hadn't been used in 22 years. I looked at my reflection still in my robe hair, a mess, eyes red. But underneath, I could see her, Judge Caldwell. She'd been sleeping, not dead. And my daughter had just made the mistake of waking her up. The morning of the trial, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. I'd chosen a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. The kind of thing a grieving widow would wear. Modest, understated, exactly what everyone expected to see. But the woman wearing it wasn't the same person who'd received that lawsuit 5 weeks ago. My posture was different, straighter. My eyes held something they hadn't held in years. Not just determination, but certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from remembering exactly who you are and what you're capable of. In the mirror, I could see both versions of myself. The widow everyone expected, and underneath, like a ghost waiting to materialize, Judge Caldwell. Let them see the widow I thought adjusting my collar. Let them underestimate me. Let them think I'm helpless. By the time they realized their mistake, it would be too late. I drove through San Francisco's morning fog, the city emerging in glimpses through the gray. These streets had been my world once, when I'd worn the robes, when attorneys had trembled before my bench. I'd walked away from all of it thinking I'd never return. Funny how life circles back. The San Francisco County Superior Court rose from the mist like something out of a dream. 400 McAllister Street. I'd entered this building 1,000 times over 12 years. But never like this, never as the defendant. The marble hallways echoed with my footsteps. Security guards nodded as I passed professional courtesy to anyone entering, and I nodded back my movements, automatic and practiced. One of them looked at me twice, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, as if something about me seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. I kept walking. The courtroom doors were heavy wood, ornate and imposing. I paused before entering, taking one last breath. This was it. Everything I'd prepared for over the past week. Everything I'd remembered about myself in that darkest moment. I pushed the doors open. The courtroom was already half full. Reporters in the back rows, their pens poised. Curious onlookers who'd read the headlines and come to watch the gold-digging widow get what she deserved. And there at the plaintiff's table, Olivia. The first time I'd seen my daughter in 8 months, since William's funeral where she'd stood beside me with dry eyes and a face like stone. Now she sat in an expensive charcoal suit, her hair pulled back severely, looking every inch the wronged heiress. Beside her sat a man I recognized from the lawsuit papers, Marcus Alexander Caldwell, mid-40s, perfectly tailored suit, the kind of confidence that came from never losing. His briefcase was open documents arranged with military precision. This was a man who left nothing to chance. Olivia saw me enter. Our eyes met across the courtroom and something cold flickered across her face. Not sadness, not regret. Something closer to satisfaction. As if seeing me walk in alone, without an attorney, without allies, confirmed everything she'd believed about how this would go. She actually smirked. I kept my expression neutral and took my seat at the defendant's table. Alone. A stack of legal pads in front of me filled with notes I'd taken during the past week of frantic preparation. To everyone watching, I probably looked like a desperate woman playing lawyer, scribbling down research she didn't fully understand. Perfect. All rise. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. Everyone stood. And then he entered the judge, who would preside over my trial. Judge Robert Mitchell Anderson, 52. Now, though, I remembered him much younger. He'd appeared before my court as a fresh-faced attorney in the late 90s, nervous and overprepared. I'd ruled in his favor that day, and he'd thanked me after with almost embarrassing gratitude. He looked older now, more weathered, but still sharp, still fair if I remembered correctly. He took his seat, arranged his papers, and surveyed the courtroom with practiced authority. His eyes passed over me without a flicker of recognition. Of course they did. He'd known Judge Diana Caldwell, a woman in robes, powerful and commanding, not this 63-year-old widow in a simple navy dress, sitting alone at the defendant's table. 23 years was a long time. People change. And I'd spent those years deliberately making myself invisible. Please be seated, Judge Anderson said. His voice was firm but not unkind. We're here today for the matter of Bennett versus Bennett. Mr. Caldwell, you may proceed with your opening statement. Marcus stood buttoning his jacket with the fluid motion of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He moved to the center of the courtroom and I watched him assess the jury, the judge, the gallery. Reading the room. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying perfectly. This is a simple case about manipulation, greed, and an elderly man taken advantage of in his final months. I kept my face blank, but inside I was taking notes. His cadence, his word choices, the way he paused for emphasis. William Bennett was a brilliant man, Marcus continued. A successful entrepreneur worth over $12 million. And in his final year, as cancer ravaged his body, he was vulnerable, scared, dependent on the people around him for care. He turned, gesturing toward me without quite looking at me, as if I weren't worth his direct attention. The defendant, Diana Bennett, is a woman with no education beyond high school, no career, no skills. For 20 years, she lived off Mr. Bennett's success while contributing nothing to the marriage. And when he was at his weakest, dying and desperate, she manipulated him into leaving her everything. I wrote that down. No education, no skills, manipulated. The foundation of his entire case. She isolated Mr. Bennett from his only daughter. Marcus's voice rose with righteous anger. She controlled his medications, his phone calls, his visitors. She made sure that when it came time to write his will, he had no one else to turn to, no one else to leave his fortune to. He paused, letting that sink in. Some people in the gallery were nodding. I could feel their judgment like a physical weight. Ms. Bennett's attorney will tell you this is a love story. Marcus said, his tone dripping with disdain. But the evidence will show you it's a con job. A calculated scheme by an uneducated housewife to steal everything from a man who couldn't defend himself. He walked back to his table, satisfied. Olivia was nodding along with every word. Judge Anderson turned to me. Mrs. Bennett, do you have an opening statement? I felt the entire courtroom's attention shift. Everyone leaning forward, slightly curious to see what the helpless widow would say. If she'd cry, if she'd fumble, if she'd prove Marcus right just by opening her mouth. I stood slowly, smoothed my dress, walked to the center of the courtroom with measured steps, and I looked directly at the judge. Your Honor. I said, my voice clear and steady. I loved my husband for 43 years. I raised our daughter, and the truth will speak louder than these accusations. I let the words hang in the air for just a moment, not long enough to seem dramatic, just long enough to land. Then I returned to my seat. The entire statement had taken maybe 15 seconds. Marcus had spoken for 10 minutes, laying out an elaborate narrative. I'd given them one simple truth. I saw Judge Anderson's eyebrow raise slightly, saw a few jurors shift in their seats. Even Marcus looked momentarily thrown, as if he'd expected me to stumble. Mr. Caldwell. Judge Anderson said, "Call your first witness." Marcus recovered quickly, pulling out his papers. "Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Dorothy Parker to the stand. My former neighbor. I'd expected this. I'd prepared for this. As Mrs. Parker was sworn in, I arranged my legal pads, pages and pages of case citations, cross-examination strategies, precedents I'd studied until dawn. My handwriting was small and precise, the kind of notes an attorney would take, the kind Judge Caldwell had taken for 12 years. No one in this courtroom had any idea what they were about to face. Marcus thought he was prosecuting a helpless widow. Olivia thought she was crushing a woman who had no weapons to fight back. Even Judge Anderson saw me as just another self-represented defendant who'd be eaten alive. But as I glanced down at my notes at the carefully constructed defense I'd spent a week building, I allowed myself the smallest, coldest smile. My daughter thought she was fighting a housewife. She had no idea who I really was, but she was about to find out. Mrs. Dorothy Parker took the witness stand with the confidence of someone who believed she was doing the right thing. I watched her settle into the chair, smooth her skirt, and place her hand on the Bible for swearing in. My neighbor of 8 years. The woman who'd brought me casseroles when William was sick. Who'd hugged me at his funeral. Who'd crossed the street to avoid me 3 weeks ago because she'd read one newspaper article and decided I was guilty. Marcus approached her with practiced charm. "Mrs. Parker, how long have you known the defendant?" 8 years, Dorothy said, her voice steady. "We've been neighbors since 2017. And would you say you were close?" "I thought so. We had coffee together regularly. I considered Diana a friend." Past tense, I noted that. Marcus led her through the setup, our friendship, her interactions with William, her visits during his illness. Then he moved in for the attack. "Mrs. Parker, did you have a conversation with Mrs. Bennett last November, shortly after her husband's diagnosis?" Dorothy's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Yes, she came to my house one afternoon. She was upset. Can you describe that conversation?" Diana was crying. She said she was scared about what would happen when William died. She specifically mentioned being worried about the inheritance. I saw several jurors lean forward. In the gallery, people were taking notes. She mentioned the inheritance specifically. Marcus repeated, as if he couldn't believe his luck. "Yes, she said she was frightened about what would happen to everything when he was gone." Marcus turned to the jury with a significant look. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Anderson turned to me. "Mrs. Bennett, do you wish to cross-examine?" This was it, my first real test. Everyone in that courtroom was watching to see if the widow could actually defend herself or if she'd crumble under pressure. I stood slowly gathering my legal pad. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. 23 years since I'd cross-examined a witness, but the muscle memory was there waiting. I approached Dorothy, keeping my expression neutral but not hostile. "Mrs. Parker." I began my voice clear and measured. "You testified that I was crying when I came to your house that afternoon. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And you said I was upset." "Very upset, yes." "Mrs. Parker, earlier that same day, I'd been to an appointment with William's oncologist. Do you remember what news I'd received?" Dorothy hesitated, something flickering across her face. The doctor had given him a prognosis. Specifically. I pressed gently but firmly. Dr. Harrison had told us that my husband had approximately 6 weeks to live. Isn't that right? "Yes," Dorothy said quietly. "So when I came to your house crying, I'd just learned my husband of 43 years had 6 weeks left. Would you agree I had reason to be emotional?" "Of course." I moved closer, not threateningly but with purpose. "Now, Mrs. Parker, you testified that I mentioned being scared about what would happen when William died. Can you recall my exact words?" Dorothy frowned, thinking. You said you were scared about what would happen. Let me be more specific. Did I say I was scared about being poor, about losing money?" "No, but what did I actually say I was scared of, Mrs. Parker?" Dorothy's voice was softer now. You said you were scared of being alone, of living without him. I let that hang in the air for a moment. So when I mentioned the inheritance, what exactly did I say? You asked what you were supposed to do with everything. The house, the company. You said you didn't know how to manage it all alone. I said I didn't know how to manage without him, without William. Not that I was worried about keeping the money. I was worried about being a widow. Is that a fair characterization? Dorothy looked down at her hands. Yes, that's more accurate. So, to be absolutely clear, I never said I was afraid of being poor. I said I was afraid of being alone, of losing my husband. Correct. Correct. Thank you, Mrs. Parker. No further questions. As I walked back to my table, I saw the shift in the courtroom. Jurors who'd been leaning forward with interest were now sitting back, reconsidering. Judge Anderson was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and Marcus's confident smile had faltered. But I didn't let myself feel victorious. This was just the beginning. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Anderson said, "Call your next witness." Marcus recovered quickly, though I saw him exchange a glance with Olivia. The plaintiff calls Richard Stevens to the stand. A man in his early 50s took the stand-trimmed suit banking industry polish. I recognized his name from William's financial records. Mr. Stevens. Marcus began. "You're a senior account manager at Pacific Bank." "Yes, I managed Mr. Bennett's business accounts for 15 years. "And you had interactions with both Mr. Bennett and his wife during his final months." "Yes, Mr. Bennett came in several times to reorganize his accounts." Marcus pulled out a document. "According to these records, Mr. Bennett moved over $3 million between accounts in his final 2 months. Is that accurate?" "Yes." "And Mrs. Bennett was present for these meetings?" "Most of them, yes." Marcus turned to the jury. "So the defendant was involved in moving millions of dollars while her husband was dying. Tell me, Mr. Stevens, did you find this unusual?" I stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation." Judge Anderson looked at me with surprise, not at the objection, but at the precision of it. "Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Caldwell." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "What was your impression of these transactions, Mr. Stevens?" "Well, they were—" "Objection," I said calmly. "Still calls for speculation rather than fact." Sustained. Marcus was visibly frustrated now. "Mr. Stevens, who initiated these transfers—" "Mr. Bennett did. He came to me with specific instructions." "And Mrs. Bennett benefited from these transfers?" "The accounts were restructured to make them easier to access after his death, yes." Marcus nodded, satisfied. No further questions. He thought he'd made his point, but he'd left me an opening. I stood, and this time I felt more confident, more like myself. "Mr. Stevens." I began. "You testified that my husband initiated these transfers. Did I ever ask him to move this money?" "No, ma'am." "Did I ever suggest restructuring the accounts?" "No, it was entirely Mr. Bennett's idea." "And you said these reorganizations were meant to make the accounts easier to access after his death. Can you explain what that means?" Stevens nodded. Mr. Bennett was concerned that the accounts were too complicated. He wanted to make sure his wife could access funds easily without needing multiple signatures or extensive paperwork. He was trying to make things simpler for her. So, these weren't suspicious transactions. They were a thoughtful husband preparing to help his widow. Is that accurate? "Yes, that's accurate." I glanced at my notes. "Mr. Stevens in these meetings. How did my husband speak about me?" Stevens' expression softened. "With great love, Mrs. Bennett. He was very clear that you'd sacrificed everything for the family. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of." He said I'd sacrificed everything. "Yes. He talked about your career, how you'd given it up to raise his daughter. He said he needed to make sure you were secure." I let those words settle over the courtroom. "Thank you, Mr. Stevens. No further questions." As I sat down, I allowed myself to glance at Olivia. Her confident smirk was gone. She was staring at the table, her jaw tight. Marcus stood quickly. "Your Honor, the plaintiff requests a recess for lunch." "Granted. We'll reconvene at 1:30. As people filed out, I organized my notes, keeping my head down. But I heard them, the whispers, the surprised murmurs. "She's good. Did you see how she handled that? She's not what I expected." I heard Marcus, too, as he passed Olivia's table. His voice was low but sharp. "She's better than you said. Way better. What aren't you telling me? I didn't look up. Didn't let them see my satisfaction. But as the courtroom emptied, I felt Judge Anderson's eyes on me. When I finally glanced up, he was watching me with an expression I recognized from my own days on the bench, curiosity mixed with suspicion. The look of a judge who's just realized something doesn't add up. He didn't say anything, just gathered his papers and left. Good, let him wonder. Tomorrow, Marcus would bring heavier ammunition. I knew that. This was just the opening skirmish. But I'd won the first round. And more importantly, I'd shown them I wasn't the helpless widow they'd expected. Court adjourned for the day. As I gathered my notes, pages filled with case citations and cross-examination strategies, I caught Judge Anderson watching me one last time. Something in the way I'd questioned those witnesses had caught his attention. The precision, the control, the professional confidence that no self-taught defendant should have. Good, let him wonder. Let them all wonder. Tomorrow Marcus would come at me harder. I knew his type, he wouldn't make the same mistake twice. And I'd be ready. The next morning, Marcus came out swinging. I could see it in the way he moved tighter, more aggressive. Yesterday's confidence had been replaced with something harder. He'd underestimated me once. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Your Honor. He began. The plaintiff has new evidence regarding Mr. Bennett's mental capacity when his will was executed. My stomach tightened. New evidence on day 2 was an ambush. Marcus pulled out a folder. We have medical documentation showing Mr. Bennett suffered from diminished cognitive function in his final year. Early signs of dementia that would have impaired his decision-making. Objection, I said, standing. We haven't been provided with these documents. Marcus barely looked at me. Your Honor, these records were obtained yesterday evening. We're providing them to the defense now. Judge Anderson frowned. You're skirting the line, Mr. Caldwell. Mrs. Bennett, you'll have time to review. A clerk brought the folder to my table. Medical assessment forms, cognitive tests, notes about memory loss and confusion, all dated to William's final year. But something was wrong. I scanned the documents with my trained eye. The dates didn't align. The terminology was outdated phrases that hadn't been used in years. And the signature at the bottom, Dr. Harrison, looked off. These were fake. I was sure of it. But I couldn't prove it. Not yet. Not without William's real medical records. I made notes in the margins. Subpoena UCSF records. Check signature. Verify dates. Mrs. Bennett, do you need time to review? Judge Anderson asked. No, Your Honor. I'm ready to proceed. Marcus called his next witness. The plaintiff calls Sarah Mitchell to the stand. A woman in her late 30s took the stand. Professional attire, nervous hands. I'd never seen her before in my life. Ms. Mitchell, what was your relationship with William Bennett? I was his home care medical assistant during his final months. A lie. William had refused home care, but I kept my expression neutral. Did you observe the relationship between Mr. Bennett and his wife? Yes, I was there 6 days a week for 3 months. Another lie. Can you describe what you observed? Sarah took a breath. Mrs. Bennett was very controlling. She monitored all his phone calls. She refused to let him contact his daughter. When Olivia would call, Mrs. Bennett would hang up. I wrote that down. Claims I blocked calls, checked phone records. Did you express concern about this behavior? I tried to, but Mrs. Bennett controlled the medications too. If I interfered, I'd be dismissed. It was a masterful performance. Sarah even looked genuinely distressed. Marcus sat down satisfied. Mrs. Bennett, Judge Anderson said. I stood, and this time I didn't hide my anger. Controlled, precise, but unmistakably there. Ms. Mitchell, you testified that you were Mr. Bennett's home care assistant for 3 months, correct? Yes. I pulled out a document. This is the visitor log from UCSF Helen Diller Cancer Center, where my husband received treatment. According to this, I was present for 147 days during his 6-month treatment. How many times does your name appear, Ms. Mitchell? Sarah faltered. I wasn't at the hospital. I worked at the home. So you have no record of being at his medical appointments. I worked at the residence. How many times did Olivia Bennett visit her dying father at the hospital? Sarah hesitated. I don't recall. According to this official record, 2 times. Is that accurate? If that's what the record says. I moved closer. You testified that I prevented my husband from calling his daughter. I'd like to present my phone records. I handed copies to the clerk. These show I called Olivia's number 47 times during that period. She answered 6 calls. Would you like to revise your testimony? Sarah's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady, too steady. That's what I was told happened. Told by whom? Who told you to say I prevented contact? Who paid you to lie under oath? Objection. Marcus was on his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Rephrase Mrs. Bennett. I softened my tone but kept my eyes on Sarah. Who instructed you on what to say today? Sarah's eyes flickered toward Olivia's table. Just for a second. But I saw it. The jury saw it too. I'm telling the truth, she said weakly. No further questions. As I returned to my seat, I saw the shift. Jurors weren't just interested, they were skeptical. Judge Anderson was making notes, and Marcus looked worried. After court adjourned, I didn't go home. I met someone in a coffee shop 3 blocks away, James Harper. We'd worked together when I was on the bench. He'd been a court investigator then. Now he ran a private firm. Judge Caldwell, he said, using my old title. I heard you retired. I did, 23 years ago, but I need your help now. I explained everything. He listened without interrupting. $5,000, I said. That's half of what I have left. But if witnesses are being paid to lie, I need proof. James was quiet, then nodded. For you, $3,000, discounted, and I'll prioritize it. Thank you. I gave him names: Sarah Mitchell, Patricia Reynolds, Marcus's next witness, anyone connected to Olivia's case. That night, I sat at William's desk and opened my laptop. I found the email thread with Emily Watson, Olivia's former Stanford roommate. I typed carefully. Ms. Watson, my name is Diana Bennett. My husband William corresponded with you about our daughter, Olivia. I'm facing Olivia in court. She's contesting her father's will. Would you be willing to talk? Respectfully, Diana Bennett. I hit send. Then I returned to the medical records. I read them again, making more notes. The inconsistencies were glaring. Wrong terminology, suspicious dates, that off signature. Tomorrow I'd file a motion to subpoena William's real UCSF records. When those arrived, they'd prove these documents were fabricated. Marcus was playing dirty. Fake records, paid witnesses. He was so confident in his narrative that he'd gotten careless. But I wasn't just a widow anymore. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. The woman I'd been for 23 years, quiet, accommodating, invisible. And underneath, finally awake, the woman I'd been before. The Widow Act was over, and Marcus had no idea what he'd just walked into. If you're still here with me, comment, I'm still watching, so I know you're still on this journey. And tell me honestly if you were in my position, standing alone with nothing but the truth, while everything around you starts to feel off. Would you keep fighting? Or would you walk away before it gets worse? Because what happened next changed everything. And just a quick note, the next part of this story includes some dramatized elements for storytelling purposes. It may not fully reflect reality, so if it's not for you, feel free to stop watching here. On day 3, Marcus played what he thought was his winning card. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Patricia Reynolds to the stand. I watched a woman I'd known for 12 years take the witness stand. Patricia, elegant, well-dressed. Someone I'd worked beside on countless charity events. We'd organized galas together. Raised millions for causes we both believed in. I'd considered her a friend. The way she avoided my eyes told me everything I needed to know. Ms. Reynolds. Marcus began. How long have you known the defendant? 12 years. We met through the Pacific Heights Charitable Foundation. Would you say you were close? I thought so. We spent considerable time together over the years. Marcus moved closer. Ms. Reynolds, approximately 3 years ago, did you have a conversation with Mrs. Bennett at a foundation gala? Patricia's expression was carefully neutral. Yes, several people were present. Can you describe that conversation? We were discussing our marriages. Diana made a comment that struck me as unusual. What did she say? Patricia looked directly at me, and I saw something cold in her eyes. She said that marrying William was the smartest investment she'd ever made. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I felt the floor drop out from under me. She used those exact words, Marcus pressed. Smartest investment? Yes, several people heard her say it. It was quite memorable. That was a lie, a complete fabrication. But the jury was leaning forward, taking notes, their expressions shifting toward condemnation. No further questions. Judge Anderson turned to me. Mrs. Bennett, I stood on shaking legs. Patricia, I said, my voice barely controlled. We've been friends for 12 years. Why are you lying? Objection, Marcus said. Assumes facts not in evidence. Sustained. Mrs. Bennett, do you have actual questions? I tried. God, I tried. But Patricia had her story down perfectly, and without proof of what she'd been paid, proof I knew was coming but didn't have yet, I couldn't shake her. I'm under oath, Diana, Patricia said, her tone cold. The truth hurts sometimes. I had no more questions. I sat down feeling defeated, feeling the weight of the jury's judgment. When I slumped in my chair, I saw Marcus exchange a satisfied glance with Olivia, saw my daughter's smirk return. They thought they'd won. Judge Anderson called for a morning recess. As people filed out, my phone buzzed. A text from James, my investigator. Have something on Reynolds. Need 24 hours to confirm. Solid. I closed my eyes and breathed. 24 hours. I could hold on for 24 hours. When court reconvened, Judge Anderson was organizing papers at his bench routine administrative work that happens during every trial. He looked up at me. Mrs. Bennett, for the record, could you state your full legal name? It was a standard question, asked in every trial. But in that moment, with Patricia's lies still hanging in the air, with Olivia's smirk burned into my vision, with Marcus's confidence filling the room like smoke, I made a choice. Diana Frances Bennett, Your Honor, I said clearly. And your maiden name, this was it, the moment. Once I said it, there was no going back. I took a deep breath. Caldwell, Your Honor, Diana Frances Caldwell. Judge Anderson's pen stopped mid-stroke. His head snapped up so fast I heard his neck crack. He stared at me, his expression transforming from professional neutrality to absolute shock. Diana Caldwell, he said slowly, as in, yes, Your Honor. Judge Diana Caldwell from Superior Court. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Everyone was leaning forward, not understanding yet, but sensing something monumental was happening. I was Superior Court Judge Diana Caldwell. I said, my voice steady now. I served for 12 years. I retired in 2002. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the courtroom exploded. Reporters in the back were on their phones instantly. The gallery erupted in gasps and frantic whispers. Marcus's briefcase slipped from his hands, papers scattering across his table. And Olivia's face went absolutely white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Judge Anderson was staring at me like he'd seen a ghost materialize on the witness stand. Judge Caldwell, he said, and his voice had changed. This wasn't judge to defendant anymore. This was judge to judge. I appeared before your court, late 90s. I was fresh out of law school, terrified, overprepared. You ruled in my favor. I remember, I said quietly. You did excellent work that day. You were legendary. Judge Anderson was still processing his expression, cycling through disbelief. Harvard Law, summa cum laude. You became the youngest Superior Court judge in state history at 30. You were called... He stopped himself. The Iron Judge, I finished for him. Yes, I remember that too. And you've been representing yourself in this trial without telling anyone. I'm adequately qualified, Your Honor. A sound rippled through the courtroom, half gasp, half laugh. Even Judge Anderson's lips twitched despite himself. Behind me, I could hear Marcus's frantic whispers. What the hell, she's a judge. She's been a judge this whole time. Your Honor, Marcus said, standing on unsteady legs. We weren't informed. That's because you didn't do your research, Mr. Caldwell, Judge Anderson said sharply. Mrs. Bennett's background is a matter of public record. The fact that you failed to discover it is not the court's problem. Marcus sat down hard. I stayed perfectly still, letting the chaos wash over me. Let them process it. Let them understand what they'd been up against. This court will take a 15-minute recess, Judge Anderson said, his voice cutting through the noise. When we return, we'll proceed with proper decorum. Bailiff, please clear the gallery of anyone unable to remain quiet. His gavel came down like thunder. As people filed out, the whispers were deafening. Marcus was on his phone, immediately pacing his voice tight with panic. Olivia sat frozen at the plaintiff's table, staring at nothing. And I gathered my notes, my carefully prepared cross-examinations, my case, citations, my defense strategy with steady hands. Behind me, I heard Marcus hiss to Olivia. "She's Judge Caldwell, the one they wrote law review articles about. Why didn't we know? What else? Haven't you told me?" I didn't turn around, didn't need to see their panic. I could feel it. The helpless widow act was over. The woman they'd tried to paint as an uneducated gold digger had just revealed herself to be one of the most respected legal minds in the state's history, and the real battle was about to begin. The 15-minute recess might as well have been 15 seconds. I barely made it 3 steps into the marble hallway before the cameras found me. "Judge Caldwell, why did you hide your identity? Mrs. Bennett, or should we say Judge Bennett, were you planning this all along? Did your daughter know you were a superior court judge?" I stopped, turned. Let them see my face, not the widow who'd been crying into Williams Merlot for 8 months, but the woman who'd once made seasoned attorneys stammer through their opening statements. "I didn't hide anything," I said, voice steady. "I simply chose to be a wife and a mother for 22 years. That was my life. That was my priority, and I have no regrets." A reporter pushed closer. "But you let them walk into court without knowing due diligence." I interrupted is a fundamental requirement of legal practice. If opposing counsel failed to research their opponent, that's not my responsibility. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a trial to finish. I turned before they could ask another question. Behind me, I heard Marcus's voice tight-clipped, barely controlled. "Judge Caldwell." I didn't stop walking. He caught up anyway, his charcoal suit slightly rumpled now, his confidence from this morning completely gone. "You let us walk in there blind," he hissed. "You let us build a case against you without telling us who you were." I stopped, looked at him. Really looked at him, this man who was probably brilliant in his own right, who'd built a solid reputation at his firm, who'd taken my daughter's money and her anger and turned it into a legal weapon, and who'd never once thought to check the California bar records for Diana Caldwell, retired. "Mr. Caldwell," I said quietly, "you filed a lawsuit claiming I manipulated my elderly, confused husband into signing away his estate. You presented fabricated medical records. You brought witnesses who lied under oath, and you think I'm the one who played dirty." His jaw tightened. "I could withdraw, right now. Tell the judge we're dropping the case." "No." My voice was ice. "I want every lie exposed, every false accusation torn apart, in open court, where everyone can see exactly what my daughter tried to do. We're finishing this." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once sharply and walked away. When I returned to the courtroom, the energy had shifted. The gallery was packed now, reporters, law students, curious spectators who'd heard about the secret judge and wanted to watch the show. Olivia sat rigid at the plaintiff's table, her expensive suit suddenly looking like armor she didn't know how to wear. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Judge Anderson called the court to order. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, then paused. "Or should I say Judge Caldwell?" "Mrs. Bennett is fine, Your Honor," I replied. "That's who I've been for the past 22 years. He nodded slowly. There was something in his expression, respect maybe, or curiosity. "Very well. Mrs. Bennett, do you wish to proceed?" "I do, Your Honor, and I'd like to request that several witnesses be recalled for additional cross-examination." Marcus shot to his feet. "Your Honor, the defense can't just—" "The defense," I said calmly, "has the right to cross-examine witnesses, especially when new information has come to light that directly contradicts their testimony." Judge Anderson looked between us. "Granted. Mrs. Bennett, who would you like to recall first?" "Mr. Richard Stevens, please." When Richard Stevens took the stand again, he looked distinctly uncomfortable. The first time Marcus had called him, he'd been a simple bank employee testifying about large financial transfers. Now he was facing a former Superior Court judge who knew exactly how to dismantle evasive testimony. I didn't waste time. "Mr. Stevens, when my husband transferred $3 million into our joint account in December of 2024, did he seem confused or uncertain about the transaction?" "No, ma'am." Did he express any concerns that I was pressuring him or influencing his decisions? No, ma'am. In fact, what did he say about the transfer? Stevens glanced at Marcus, then back at me. He said he wanted to make sure you were taken care of, that you'd given up everything for your family, and he needed to ensure your financial security, the gallery murmured. I let the words sit for a moment before continuing. Did my husband ever in any of your interactions with him appear mentally diminished or incapable of making sound financial decisions? Never, Stevens said firmly. Mr. Bennett was sharp as a tack right up until the end. He knew exactly what he was doing with his estate planning. Thank you, Mr. Stevens. No further questions. Marcus tried to rehabilitate on redirect, but the damage was done. The jury had heard it directly. William wasn't confused. He was protecting me. Next came George Fletcher, one of William's colleagues from the tech company where he'd served as general counsel. Marcus had called him on day one to testify that William seemed confused when discussing legal strategies. Fletcher was in his late 50s, silver-haired, expensive watch. He settled into the witness chair with the confidence of someone who'd testified before. I smiled. I dealt with confident witnesses for 12 years on the bench. Mr. Fletcher, you testified that my husband seemed confused when discussing a client matter last September. Can you be more specific about what confused him? Well, he was frustrated with how the attorneys were handling a particular lawsuit. Frustrated, I interrupted gently. Not confused. Fletcher blinked. I suppose frustrated is more accurate, yes. He was frustrated with their legal strategy, correct? Yes, because he felt they were making poor tactical decisions. That's right. So he understood the case well enough to critique the attorney's approach. Fletcher hesitated. I could see the moment he realized the trap. Yes, and frustration with incompetent legal work is not the same as cognitive confusion. Is it, Mr. Fletcher? No, he admitted. It's not. I nodded. In fact, being able to identify poor legal strategy requires a sharp analytical mind, doesn't it? Yes, Judge Caldwell. The title hung in the air. Even Fletcher, who'd probably never met me before this trial, instinctively used it. Thank you. No further questions. By the time I finished with Fletcher, the courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling. Everyone was watching me, watching the transformation from grieving widow to the woman I'd been 3 decades ago. Judge Anderson looked at me with something close to admiration. Olivia's hands were clenched so tightly on the table that her knuckles had gone white. And Marcus looked like a man who'd just realized he'd walked into a cage with a wolf. I turned to Judge Anderson. Your Honor, I have evidence suggesting that one of the plaintiff's witnesses provided false testimony in exchange for financial compensation. I request that Patricia Reynolds be recalled to the stand tomorrow morning. The gallery exploded into whispers. Marcus jumped up. Your Honor, we weren't given notice of any such evidence. You'll have all evening to prepare Mr. Caldwell, I said smoothly. That's significantly more notice than I received regarding those fabricated medical records. Judge Anderson's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Motion granted. Ms. Reynolds will be recalled at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Court is adjourned until that time. The gavel came down. I took my time gathering my papers, sliding them into the worn leather briefcase I'd carried into courtrooms 30 years ago. It had been in the back of my closet all this time behind my winter coats and the boxes of Olivia's childhood artwork. I'd pulled it out this morning on instinct. It felt like coming home. As I stood, I caught Olivia's eye across the courtroom. For just a second, I saw my daughter again, not the angry woman who'd sued me, but the scared little girl who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares, who'd made me promise never to leave her. Then she looked away, and the moment was gone. I walked out of the courtroom alone, past the cameras and the questions, into the fading San Francisco sunlight. Tomorrow, I would expose Patricia's $50,000 payment from my daughter. Tomorrow, I would show the jury exactly how far Olivia had been willing to go to destroy me. But tonight, as I drove home through the fog rolling in from the bay, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Not just confidence, power. The kind of power that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. The kind of power I'd set aside when I'd chosen to raise my daughter to build a life with William, to be a mother instead of a judge. I'd made that choice willingly, Gladly. I'd never regretted it. But my daughter had made a terrible mistake. She hadn't sued a helpless widow with no resources and no options. She'd sued a judge. And judges know how to find the truth. The night before, I'd met the private investigator in a 24-hour diner on Market Street. James Harper slid a manila folder across the Formica table, his expression grim. "You were right," he said. $50,000. Transferred from an account in Olivia Bennett's name to Patricia Reynolds' Bank of America. September 15th, 2 days before Reynolds testified. I opened the folder. Bank statements, transaction records, account numbers, all obtained legally, through a subpoena I'd drafted myself at 3 a.m. The evidence was clean, airtight, impossible to dispute. "I've got her," I whispered. Day 4 of the trial began with a tension you could taste. The gallery was packed more reporters, more spectators, everyone wanting to see what Judge Caldwell would do next. Olivia sat rigid at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped so tightly her rings cut into her fingers. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept. I had slept just fine. "Your Honor," I said, standing. I recalled Patricia Reynolds to the stand. Patricia walked to the witness box like she was walking to her own execution. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the Bible. She wouldn't look at me. "Ms. Reynolds." I began my voice calm and professional. "You testified under oath that I once referred to my marriage to William as a smart investment. Is that correct?" "Yes," she said quietly. "And you maintain that testimony was truthful?" "Yes." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch. Then I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the bank statements. "Ms. Reynolds, 3 days ago, you deposited $50,000 into your Bank of America checking account. Where did that money come from?" Patricia's face went white. That's private, Your Honor," I said, turning to Judge Anderson. "I have financial records obtained legally through subpoena showing that Ms. Reynolds received $50,000 from an account owned by Olivia Claire Bennett. The transfer occurred on September 15th, 2 days before Ms. Reynolds testified in this courtroom." I handed the documents to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Anderson studied the statements, his expression darkening. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, his voice ice, "is this accurate?" Patricia's composure shattered. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I needed the money," she sobbed. "I have debts, gambling debts. I was desperate." Olivia said she just wanted me to tell the truth about her stepmother, that Diana had always been calculating that she'd said those things about marriage being an investment. "Ms. Reynolds," I interrupted gently, "in 12 years of friendship, did I ever say anything to you about marrying for money?" She couldn't meet my eyes. "No," she whispered. "Diana, I'm so sorry. I was desperate. She offered me $50,000 if I would just say what she wanted." "So you committed perjury for money." "I wasn't thinking straight. I'm so sorry." Judge Anderson's gavel came down like a gunshot. "Ms. Reynolds, your testimony is stricken from the record. You may face criminal charges for perjury. Bailiff, please take Ms. Reynolds' information for the district attorney's office." He turned to Olivia, who'd gone pale as a ghost. "Ms. Bennett, did you pay this witness $50,000 to testify in your case?" Olivia shot to her feet, panic written across her face. "She needed help. I didn't think it was—" "Did you or did you not pay her to provide specific testimony against your stepmother?" Olivia's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Marcus stood, his face ashen. "Your Honor, I had absolutely no knowledge of any payment to witnesses. I would never condone—" "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Anderson said sharply, "are you aware of any other payments to witnesses in this case?" "No, Your Honor, I swear." The judge looked at Marcus for a long moment, then seemed to accept his answer. He turned back to Olivia. "Ms. Bennett, witness tampering is a serious criminal offense. I'm not making any determinations about charges at this time, but this conduct is now on the record. Do you understand?" Olivia nodded, shaking. I stood again. "Your Honor, I don't wish to pursue criminal charges against Ms. Reynolds. She was desperate and made a terrible choice. But I want the record to reflect that my daughter systematically attempted to purchase testimony against me." "So noted," Judge Anderson said grimly. I glanced at the jury. They were staring at Olivia with undisguised disgust. Two of them, the retired teacher and the grocery store manager, wouldn't even look at her. Marcus leaned close to Olivia, his whisper carrying in the silent courtroom. "Is there anything else you haven't told me?" She didn't answer. Patricia stumbled from the witness stand, still crying. The bailiff escorted her out a side door. Olivia sat frozen, her face drained of color, her hands trembling on the table in front of her. Judge Anderson looked at me. "Mrs. Bennett, do you have any further witnesses?" "Not at this time, Your Honor, but I'd like to reserve the right to call additional witnesses as the defense case proceeds." "Granted, Mr. Caldwell, does the plaintiff wish to continue?" Marcus stood slowly. He looked like a man who just watched his entire case collapse. "Your Honor, may we have a brief recess to confer with our client?" 15 minutes, Judge Anderson said and brought down his gavel. I gathered my papers and walked out into the hallway. Reporters swarmed immediately, shouting questions about the bribery, about Patricia, about whether I thought Olivia should face charges. I ignored them all and found a bench by a window overlooking the city. San Francisco spread out below me, the buildings, the bay, the fog rolling in from the Pacific. Somewhere out there was the house William and I had shared the rooms where I'd raised our daughter, the life I'd built when I'd chosen to stop being Judge Caldwell and start being Diana Bennett. I'd made that choice out of love. I'd never regretted it. But sitting there, watching my daughter's case crumble around her, watching her face charges for witness tampering, watching her learn the hardest way possible that lies have consequences, I wondered if I'd made the wrong choice after all. Maybe if I'd stayed Judge Caldwell, Olivia wouldn't have grown up in my shadow. Maybe she wouldn't have felt like she had to compete with a ghost. Maybe she wouldn't have been so desperate to destroy me that she'd broken the law. Or maybe this was always going to happen. Maybe the moment William died, the moment grief and fear took hold of her, this was inevitable. When I returned to the courtroom, Olivia was crying silently at the plaintiff's table. Marcus sat beside her, his jaw tight, his briefcase already packed. He looked like a man preparing to surrender. Judge Anderson called us back to order. "Mr. Caldwell?" Marcus stood. "Your Honor, the plaintiff requests a recess until tomorrow morning. We need time to reassess our position." "Granted. Court will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow. We're adjourned." The gavel fell. I stood and gathered my briefcase. As I turned to leave, I caught Olivia's eye across the courtroom. She looked at me. Really looked at me, and I saw it all there, the fear, the shame, the desperate realization that she'd gone too far. For just a second, I wanted to go to her, to cross the courtroom and pull her into my arms the way I had when she was small, when nightmares woke her in the middle of the night, when she needed her mother to tell her everything would be okay. But I didn't move, because I wasn't sure everything would be okay. Not anymore. I'd won this battle. The jury had seen my daughter try to buy false testimony. They'd seen her lies exposed in open court. Marcus would almost certainly recommend she drop the case. But looking at Olivia's tear-streaked face, looking at the wreckage of our relationship spread across this courtroom floor, I couldn't help but wonder, had we both already lost the war? Task 11, Day 5, began with Marcus looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. Olivia sat beside him, hollow-eyed, her expensive suit wrinkled. The gallery was quieter today. Fewer reporters, more lawyers who'd come to watch a master at work. I stood. "Your Honor, I call Emily Watson to the stand." The courtroom doors opened. A woman in her mid-30s walked in navy suit, auburn hair, pulled back the kind of confident stride you only get from years of high-stakes litigation. She moved like someone who belonged in courtrooms. Olivia's head snapped up. Her face went white. "No," she whispered. "Not her, please, not her." Marcus leaned close. "Who is she?" Olivia's voice was barely audible. "The biggest mistake I ever made." Emily Watson took the stand and raised her right hand. Judge Anderson swore her in. "Miss Watson," I began, "please tell the court your occupation." "I'm a partner at Morrison and Forster specializing in corporate litigation." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Morrison and Forster was one of San Francisco's most prestigious firms. You didn't make partner there unless you were exceptional. "How do you know my daughter?" Emily looked directly at Olivia. "We were best friends at Stanford Law School, roommates for 2 years, class of 2016. I felt my eyebrows rise. "Best friends, are you still close?" "No, we haven't spoken in 9 years." "Why not?" Emily's gaze didn't waver from Olivia's face. Because during our summer internship at a securities firm, Olivia took my legal research on a fraud case research I'd spent 3 months developing and presented it to the partners as her own work. When I confronted her with email evidence proving the research was mine, she was dismissed from the internship. Our friendship ended that day. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Anderson's gavel came down. I let the silence settle before continuing. That must have been painful. Why are you here today? Emily's expression softened slightly. Because I loved Olivia like a sister once. The Olivia I knew, who stayed up all night helping me study, who held me when my father passed away during our second year, that Olivia believed in justice. I'm here because she needs to hear the truth from someone who knew her before she became this. Ms. Watson, during the years you knew Olivia, did she express feelings about me? Constantly. She was obsessed with it. Can you give an example? Emily nodded. Spring 2015. We were studying for our evidence law final. Olivia threw her laptop across the room and screamed, "My mother wrote the treatise on evidence law. Everyone expects me to be just like her. How am I supposed to compete with Judge Caldwell?" My breath caught. I'd never known. Emily continued. I told her, "Don't compete. Be your own kind of lawyer." She said, "There is no own kind when your mother is Judge Diana Caldwell. There's only her shadow." My hand moved to my mouth. Tears burned behind my eyes. "Ms. Watson." I managed my voice unsteady. I never knew she felt that way. She didn't want you to know. She thought if you knew she was struggling, you'd be disappointed. I had to pause, collect myself. The courtroom was utterly silent. Did Olivia struggle in law school? She was brilliant, Emily said, but she put impossible pressure on herself, and she failed the California bar exam twice. The words hit me like a physical blow, the first time. Emily continued, "She had a panic attack during the test. Afterward, she told me, Mom passed on her first try. What's wrong with me?" I couldn't stop the tears now. They slid down my cheeks as I stood there in front of the jury, in front of the gallery, in front of my daughter. "I didn't know," I whispered. "She never told me." "She couldn't," Emily said gently. "How do you tell Judge Diana Caldwell, the woman who gave up a federal judgeship to raise you, that you're drowning? How do you admit you're not good enough when your mother sacrificed everything to make you her priority?" I nodded, unable to speak. Emily turned to the jury. "I'm not here because I've forgiven what Olivia did to me. I haven't. But watching her try to destroy her own mother, a woman who turned down the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to raise her daughter, that's not justice. That's self-destruction. The Olivia I knew would be ashamed of the woman she's become." Marcus stood for cross-examination, but his heart wasn't in it. "Ms. Watson, isn't it true you have a personal grudge against my client?" "Yes," Emily said simply, "but that doesn't make my testimony less true. He had nothing else." He sat down. Emily stepped down from the witness stand. As she passed Olivia's table, she stopped and leaned close enough that only Olivia and I, and perhaps Marcus, could hear. "The truth will set you free, Liv," she whispered. "But first it's going to hurt like hell." Olivia stared at the table, tears streaming down her face. Emily Watson walked out of the courtroom with her head high, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The doors closed behind her, and I sat at my table, finally understanding the weight my daughter had carried for 22 years, living in my shadow, terrified of disappointing me, unable to tell me she was sinking. I'd thought I'd given her everything by retiring. I hadn't realized I'd given her an impossible standard to reach a perfect mother who'd sacrificed it all. How do you compete with that? How do you tell that mother you're failing? I looked across the courtroom at Olivia. She was crying silently, her shoulders shaking, Marcus's hand hovering awkwardly near her arm, but not quite touching. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't see the woman who'd sued me. I saw my daughter, and I finally understood why she'd done it. After the 15-minute recess, I stood again. My voice was steady, professional, the voice of Judge Caldwell, not the mother who'd just learned her daughter had been drowning for 22 years. "Your Honor, I call Dr. Robert Harrison to the stand." A man in his early 60s walked to the witness box, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades delivering life and death news. He wore a UCSF Medical Center ID badge clipped to his jacket. After he was sworn in, I began. Dr. Harrison, how did you know my husband? I was Mr. Bennett's oncologist at UCSF. I treated him for 6 months before he passed away in January. Can you describe his mental state during that time? Dr. Harrison didn't hesitate. William Bennett was completely lucid and sharp until his final week. There were absolutely no signs of dementia or cognitive decline. He understood his diagnosis, participated actively in treatment decisions, and remained mentally engaged with his family and his work. I pulled out the fabricated medical records Marcus had submitted on day 2. Doctor, the plaintiff, presented medical documents suggesting otherwise. Have you reviewed these? He took the papers, studied them for a long moment, then shook his head. These don't match our hospital records. The dates are wrong, the assessment terminology is outdated, and I never wrote this evaluation. These appear to be fabricated. The gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Anderson's gavel came down. I handed the bailiff a folder. Your Honor, these are the authentic UCSF records, obtained through proper subpoena. They show my husband's mental capacity was perfect throughout his treatment. Judge Anderson reviewed the documents. So the medical records provided by the plaintiff are false. Yes, Your Honor, Dr. Harrison confirmed. I nodded slowly, then continued. Dr. Harrison, I understand you also have hospital visitor logs. I do. Mrs. Bennett was present for 147 days out of the 180 days of Mr. Bennett's treatment. Miss Bennett visited twice. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Did my husband express a desire to see his daughter? Dr. Harrison's expression softened with sympathy. Constantly, we have records of text messages. He sent her 23 messages over his final 2 months. She responded twice. I felt my throat tighten but kept my voice level. What did he say in his final hours? He asked for his daughter, repeatedly. Where's Olivia? I need to see her. You called her 6 times that last day, Mrs. Bennett. She never came. I heard a sound from the plaintiff's table, a choked sob. Olivia had her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Thank you, Dr. Harrison. No further questions. Marcus had no cross-examination. What could he possibly ask? As Dr. Harrison stepped down, Marcus shot to his feet. He looked desperate, cornered a man watching his entire case disintegrate. Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence. An earlier will dated May 2020. He approached the bench with a document. This will leave 50% of the estate to Ms. Bennett. The 2024 will was executed under duress after the cancer diagnosis when Mr. Bennett was vulnerable and increasingly dependent on his wife. The courtroom exploded. Judge Anderson's gavel couldn't quiet the noise. I stood calmly. Your Honor, may I examine this document? Proceed. Marcus handed me the papers. I studied them for several minutes, the signature, the notary's seal, the paper stock, the language. The courtroom waited in tense silence. Finally, I looked up. This signature is forged, I said clearly. My husband developed early-stage Parkinson's tremor in 2019. After that date, his signature always had a distinctive loop on the B in Bennett. This signature doesn't have it. I held up the document so the jury could see. Second, this notary seal belongs to Harold Mitchell, who was stripped of his notary commission in November 2019. 6 months before this will was allegedly executed in May 2020. Marcus's face went white. Third, I continued, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. This paper stock was manufactured by Dennison Paper Company, which didn't begin production until March 2022, 2 years after the date on this will. I set the document on the table. This is a complete fabrication. Judge Anderson's face darkened with fury. Mr. Caldwell, where did you get this document? Marcus looked like he might be sick. My client provided it last night. I assumed she'd verified its authenticity. I would never intentionally... Ms. Bennett, Judge Anderson said, his voice like ice. Did you forge this will? Olivia stood shakily. Her face was ashen-streaked with tears. Marcus said we needed more evidence. I thought, I never told you to forge anything. Marcus shouted, then caught himself. Your Honor, I had no knowledge. Ms. Bennett, Judge Anderson interrupted, document forgery is a felony. Do you understand you could face criminal charges? Olivia began to cry in earnest. I needed... She couldn't finish. She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. Judge Anderson looked at her for a long moment, then at me, then back at Olivia. 15-minute recess. All parties remain in the building. The gavel came down. I sat at my table as the courtroom emptied. Olivia remained at the plaintiff's table, shaking uncontrollably. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. His career, his reputation, his integrity, all of it tainted by association with this disaster. But I couldn't take my eyes off my daughter. She'd forged a will. She'd committed a felony. In her desperation to destroy me, she'd crossed a line that could send her to prison. I'd won. The case was over. Marcus would withdraw, the jury would rule in my favor, I'd keep William's estate. Judge Caldwell had triumphed again. But looking at Olivia crying at that table, looking at the wreckage of the brilliant, sensitive girl who'd once helped me bake cookies and asked me to read her one more bedtime story, I felt my heart break. Not because of the lawsuit. I'd won that the moment I'd revealed my identity. But because of the woman my daughter had become. So desperate, so lost that she'd committed a crime. What had I done to her? How had we gotten here? Emily's words echoed in my mind. How do you tell Judge Diana Caldwell that you're drowning? My daughter had been drowning for 22 years, and I'd never seen it. Because I'd been too busy being the perfect mother who'd sacrificed everything. Because I'd given her an impossible standard to meet and then wondered why she was failing. Because I'd retired to raise her, and in doing so, I'd cast a shadow so large she could never step out of it. I'd thought I was giving her everything. I'd never realized I was taking everything away. Judge Anderson returned. Court is back in session. Mr. Caldwell, does your client wish to proceed? Marcus stood slowly. His voice was hollow. Your Honor, in light of recent revelations, the plaintiff wishes to request a continuance to reassess our position. Denied, Judge Anderson said flatly. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for closing arguments. Be prepared to proceed or withdraw your case entirely. We're adjourned. As I gathered my briefcase and walked out of the courtroom, I heard Olivia's voice behind me. Small, broken, the voice of the little girl who used to climb into my lap. Mom. I stopped, turned. She was standing, tears streaming down her face, Marcus hovering uncertainly beside her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. For a moment I wanted to go to her, to hold her, to tell her it would be okay, but I didn't know if it would be okay. So I just nodded once in acknowledgement, not forgiveness, and walked away. When we returned from recess, Olivia looked like she'd aged 10 years. Her face was blotchy, her hands shaking. Marcus sat beside her, but there was distance between them now, the distance between a lawyer and a client he no longer trusted. Judge Anderson looked at Olivia. Ms. Bennett, you need to explain to this court. You want the truth? Olivia shot to her feet, her voice cracking. Fine, I forged it. I did it because she took everything from me. The courtroom froze. My entire life. Olivia shouted, tears streaming down her face. You were the great Judge Caldwell. Everyone loved you, respected you, wanted to be you. And I was just Judge Caldwell's daughter, never just Olivia, never my own person. Her voice broke, but she kept going. I went to law school to make you proud. You know what I got. You'll never be as good as your mother. Every single day. Professors, classmates, even the career counselor. I failed the bar exam twice because I had panic attacks thinking about disappointing you. And Dad! She turned to look at me, her face twisted with pain. Dad worshipped you. Every dinner, every conversation. Your mother is so brilliant, so perfect. What about me? When did anyone see me? I needed you, but you were too busy being everyone's hero. You retired for me. Her laugh was bitter, broken. You didn't retire for me, you retired because you were tired. And the second I graduated, you started talking about maybe going back to law. I wanted Dad's money because it was the only thing that proved I mattered to him. But even that he gave to you. She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing. I stood slowly, my legs felt unsteady. Mrs. Bennett, Judge Anderson began. I ignored him. I walked across the courtroom, past the bar, past Marcus's shocked face, and knelt beside my daughter's chair. Olivia, I whispered. Sweetheart, breathe. She looked at me, her face red and swollen. I hate you, she choked out. I hate you so much. I know, I said quietly. But I love you, and your father loved you. He left videos. He wanted you to see them. I walked back to my table and retrieved the tablet I'd been keeping in my briefcase. My hands were shaking. Your Honor, I said, my husband made 2 video testimonies before he passed away. They're dated January 3rd, 2025, and were held by his estate attorney with specific instructions only to be played if Olivia contested the will. He knew this was coming. Judge Anderson nodded slowly. You may proceed. I connected the tablet to the courtroom's display system. William's face filled the screen thinner than I remembered, pale from the treatments, but his eyes were clear and sharp. Video 1. My name is William Thomas Bennett. I'm recording this on January 3rd in the presence of my attorney, Daniel Foster of Foster and Associates. I'm of sound mind and body, though my body won't last much longer. He smiled slightly. If you're watching this, Olivia, it means you've sued your mother over my estate. I'm not angry. I'm sad. But I understand. Let me be clear, I left my estate to Diana because she earned it. 43 years of marriage, 43 years of sacrifice. Diana gave up the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, one of the most prestigious positions in American law, to be your mother. Federal judge, lifetime appointment. She turned it down. For you. You borrowed $225,000 from us over 15 years. We never asked you to pay it back. We wanted you to build your life. I left the estate to Diana because she deserves it. I left you a trust fund because I wanted you to learn something. Love isn't measured in dollars. Your mother's love for you was worth more than any inheritance. The screen went dark for a moment, then William's face appeared again. This was a different recording, closer, more intimate. His voice was softer. Video 2. Olivia, my beautiful girl, if you're watching this, you've sued your mother, and I need you to understand something. He paused, gathering strength. Do you remember when you were 13? You came to me crying one night. You said, Daddy, why is Mom always at work? Doesn't she love me? My breath caught. I remembered that night William had told me about it the next morning. I told your mother what you said. She cried for 2 hours. The next morning, she went to her chambers and submitted her resignation. Olivia made a small sound halfway between a gasp and a sob. She'd been nominated to the Ninth Circuit, federal judge. She was 42 years old, the youngest nominee in 20 years. It was everything she'd worked for. She turned it down because you asked if she loved you. She didn't retire because she was tired, Olivia. She retired because you needed her more than that judgeship. William's eyes were wet now. You said she abandoned you by working too much, then suffocated you when she retired. But sweetheart, every choice she made was for you. Every single one. I left everything to your mother because she earned it through sacrifice. But I left you a trust fund because I knew that when you were ready, when you stopped fighting her shadow and started seeing her light, she'd give it to you anyway. Because that's who she is. Stop fighting your mother's shadow, baby girl. Start treasuring the light she's given you your whole life. The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Then Olivia broke. I didn't know, she sobbed. I didn't know you gave up the Ninth Circuit. I didn't know you resigned because of what I said. Mom, I'm so sorry. I crossed back to her and pulled her into my arms. She clung to me like she used to when she was small, when nightmares woke her in the dark. I'm sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry. I forgive you, I whispered into her hair. I forgive you, sweetheart. Around us, the courtroom had dissolved. Jurors were crying openly. The court reporter had stopped typing. Marcus had his face in his hands. Judge Anderson cleared his throat. His voice was rough. We'll recess until Monday morning for closing arguments. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down softly. But Olivia and I didn't move. We stayed there holding each other while the courtroom slowly emptied around us. We stayed like that for a long time after the room had cleared. My daughter in my arms, both of us crying for all the years of pain and misunderstanding. I'd won the case, that much was clear. No jury would rule against me now. Judge Caldwell had triumphed again, dismantled every argument, exposed every lie. But sitting there holding my daughter while she sobbed into my shoulder, I realized something. Winning the case meant nothing if I lost her forever. We're going to be okay, I whispered. Somehow we're going to be okay. And for the first time in 22 years, I actually believed it. Not because I'd won in court, but because I was finally holding my daughter again. Because she'd finally told me the truth. Because after all these years in my shadow, she'd finally stepped into the light and let me see her pain. We had a long road ahead. Therapy, conversations, rebuilding trust. She might still face charges for the forgery. We'd have to figure out the money, the trust fund, what she really needed versus what she thought she needed. But right now, in this empty courtroom, none of that mattered. My daughter was in my arms, and she'd finally let me see her. Before we continue, just a quick note, some parts of this story are dramatized and may not fully reflect real events. If this journey resonates with you, feel free to share it and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And if it's not for you, you're always free to stop here. Monday morning arrived gray and cold fog rolling thick off the bay. Day 6, closing arguments. Marcus stood first. He looked exhausted, defeated, a man who knew he'd already lost but had to finish the fight anyway. Your Honor. He began, his voice flat. In light of the evidence presented, particularly Dr. Harrison's testimony and Mr. Bennett's video statements, we acknowledge that Mrs. Bennett did not manipulate her husband. He paused. We withdraw all allegations of undue influence. A murmur rippled through the gallery. We ask only that the court consider the fairness of leaving an entire estate to a spouse while excluding a biological daughter. His heart wasn't in it. Everyone could hear it. He sat down. Judge Anderson looked at me. Mrs. Bennett. I stood slowly, folding my hands in front of me. Your Honor, this case was never about money. It was about a daughter's pain and a mother's failure to see it. I glanced at Olivia. She was watching me, tears already sliding down her face. But my husband's wishes were clear. He was completely lucid. He made his choices freely with full understanding of what he was doing. I asked this court to honor those wishes. I paused, then took a breath. However, I also asked this court to show mercy to my daughter. Olivia's head snapped up. She made terrible choices, but she's not a criminal. She's a wounded woman who needs help, not punishment. I don't want her prosecuted for the forged will. I want her to receive therapy, to heal, to find herself outside my shadow. My voice broke slightly. I want my daughter back. Olivia was crying openly now. So was half the gallery. Judge Anderson was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. The court will issue a directed verdict based on the clear weight of evidence. We don't need jury deliberation. He looked down at his notes, then back up. I find in favor of the defendant, Diana Frances Bennett, on all counts. The will dated January 10th, 2025 is upheld in its entirety. Mrs. Bennett is the rightful heir to the full estate of William Thomas Bennett. He turned to Olivia. Ms. Bennett, you are ordered to repay the $225,000 loan over a period of 10 years at no interest. That's $22,500 per year. Olivia nodded, still crying. Regarding the forged will, Judge Anderson continued, his voice stern. Document forgery is a felony. However, in light of your mother's request and the unique circumstances of this case, I'm offering you an alternative. Complete 1 year of therapy with a licensed psychologist. Complete 200 hours of community service. Do both and no criminal charges will be filed. Fail either requirement and the district attorney will prosecute. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Olivia whispered. Judge Anderson looked between us. This was a family tragedy, not just a legal matter. Ms. Bennett, your mother has shown you more mercy than you deserved. Don't waste it. I won't, Your Honor. Olivia turned to look at me. Thank you, Mom. Judge Anderson's gavel came down. This court is adjourned. Scattered applause broke out rare in a courtroom, but no one stopped it. I crossed to Olivia. She stood shakily, and I pulled her into my arms. We'll figure it out, I whispered. Together. Outside, the media swarmed. I made a brief statement with Olivia standing beside me, silent but present. My daughter and I have a long road ahead, but we'll walk it together. That's all that matters. As we turned to leave, Marcus approached hesitantly. Judge Caldwell, he said quietly. I mean, Aunt Diana. I froze, turned slowly. Aunt, he smiled weakly. I'm your brother David's son. I haven't seen you since I was 15. Dad moved us to Boston 20 years ago. When Olivia hired Marcus Caldwell, she never mentioned your maiden name was also Caldwell. I had no idea Mrs. Bennett was you. I stared at him, pieces clicking into place. David's boy. Little Marcus, who used to build towers with my law books. You were just doing your job, Marcus. I fought against my own family. You didn't know, I said firmly, and you practiced ethically. You had no knowledge of the bribery or forgery. You did nothing wrong. He nodded, swallowing hard. If you ever need help, when you go back to practicing law, I'm here. I smiled. I'll remember that. We embraced briefly, family finding family in the strangest places. As Marcus walked away into the San Francisco fog, I watched my nephew disappear. Family. It always showed up where you least expected it. The case was over. I'd won everything: the estate, my reputation, my daughter's understanding. Judge Caldwell had triumphed one last time. But standing there, Olivia's hand slipping into mine, I realized something. The real battle was just beginning. Helping Olivia heal, learning how to mother a wounded woman instead of a child, figuring out what to do with $12 million and a lifetime of sacrifice, and most importantly, discovering who Diana Bennett, not Caldwell, not widow, just Diana, would become next. For 43 years, I'd been William's wife. For 22 years before that, I'd been Judge Caldwell. For 35 years, I'd been Olivia's mother. But who was I when I wasn't defined by someone else? I squeezed Olivia's hand. Ready to go home? She nodded. Yeah, Mom, let's go home. We walked down the courthouse steps together into whatever came next. 2 months after the verdict, I stood in an empty office on the 23rd floor of 1 Montgomery Street, watching the November fog roll across San Francisco's financial district. The brass plaque beside the door was still so new, it gleamed Caldwell and Associates, protecting widows and families. No grand opening. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just me, a dozen boxes of law books, and the quiet satisfaction of finally knowing what came next. I'd spent the morning unpacking. My old judicial robes, carefully folded in tissue paper, went into a closet. The books I'd written on evidence law lined the shelves. And on the wall behind my desk, I hung 3 photographs, William smiling in his garden. Olivia, taken just last week, healthier, now clearer-eyed. And one from 30 years ago, me in my judicial robes, young and fierce and certain. I was opening the last box of case files when someone knocked. Need a hand with those boxes? I turned. Emily Watson stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing jeans and a Stanford Law sweatshirt. Emily, what are you doing here? She stepped inside, handed me a coffee. I quit Morrison and Forster last week. I stared at her. You quit, Emily. You were partner track. I was tired of defending corporations who could afford 100 lawyers. I want to defend people. She met my eyes. If you'll have me, as an associate, as an employee, she said firmly, I need to prove myself. I smiled slowly. Emily, you proved yourself the moment you walked into that courtroom and told the truth about my daughter. You're a partner. Full stop. Her eyes filled. We hugged and I felt something settle in my chest, the rightness of building something meaningful with someone who understood what it cost. Over the past 2 months, I'd taken 3 pro bono cases. 3 widows facing inheritance disputes, all of them terrified and alone. We'd won all 3. Word had spread fast. Judge Caldwell is back. The local bar association wanted to honor me at their winter gala. The San Francisco Chronicle had run a feature, Legal Legend Returns to Fight for the Forgotten. My phone hadn't stopped ringing, but today's appointment was different. At 2 o'clock, a woman in her early 60s appeared in the doorway. She wore a department store dress and clutched her purse like a lifeline. Her eyes were red from crying. Mrs. Whitmore. I stood extending my hand. I'm Diana Caldwell. Please sit down. Barbara Whitmore sat carefully perched on the edge of the chair like she might need to run. Thank you for seeing me, Judge Caldwell. I read about your case. Your daughter suing you over your husband's will. I remember every detail, I said gently. My husband passed away 6 months ago. Her voice broke. His son from his first marriage is contesting the will, saying I manipulated Robert, that I'm just a gold digger who married an old man for his money. The words hit me like physical blows. I knew them by heart. Mrs. Whitmore, I said quietly, I know exactly what you're going through. Every detail, every emotion, every moment you lie awake at night wondering if you're going crazy. She burst into tears. You're my hero, Judge Caldwell. When I read what you did, how you fought back, I thought maybe someone like you could help someone like me. I reached across the desk and took her hand. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who remembers exactly what it feels like to be dismissed and alone and terrified. And I promise you, Mrs. Whitmore, we will fight this together. We spent an hour going through her case. The similarities to my own were striking: the accusations, the frozen assets, the adult child who felt entitled to money they'd never earned. Trial preparation starts next week, I told her as she stood to leave. We'll need to gather financial records, medical documentation, witness statements. It's going to be hard, but you're not alone anymore. She hugged me at the door, crying, thank you so much. After she left, I stood at the window looking out over the city. The lights were beginning to come on as dusk settled over the bay. Somewhere out there, William had built his tech company. Somewhere out there, Olivia was attending her therapy sessions, slowly piecing herself back together. And here I was building something new. 2 months ago, I won back my inheritance, I thought. But this helping people who are standing exactly where I stood, this is what William wanted me to find. My phone buzzed, a text from Olivia. Olivia, Mom. I know it's kind of late notice, but coffee tomorrow morning. I want to talk to you about something important. And you're still coming for Thanksgiving at my place, right? I'm cooking. Just the two of us, please. My eyes blurred with tears. I typed back quickly. Me 10 a.m. tomorrow at Blue Bottle. And Thanksgiving is absolutely yes. I'd love nothing more, sweetheart. 3 dots appeared then. Olivia, perfect. I love you, Mom. And I'm proud of you. The new firm. Everything you're doing. I had to set the phone down for a moment, pressing my hand to my mouth. Me, I love you too, baby. So much. I sat at my new desk, our desk mine and Emily's, and felt something I hadn't felt since William passed away. Not just happiness. Purpose. I was building something that mattered. Fighting for women who needed someone to believe them. Standing up for people the system wanted to dismiss. And tomorrow I'd have coffee with my daughter. The daughter I'd almost lost forever. The daughter who was finally slowly finding her way out of my shadow and into her own light. The lawsuit had taken everything from me, my reputation, my community, my peace. But it had given me something infinitely more valuable, myself. And maybe finally my daughter, too. I looked at the 3 photos on my wall, William, Olivia, and Judge Caldwell, and smiled. All 3 of them had shaped me. But the woman sitting in this office building this firm, helping Mrs. Whitmore and the others who would come after her, that woman was someone new. Someone who'd been broken and rebuilt. Someone who'd lost everything and discovered what actually mattered. Someone who was finally, after 63 years, exactly who she was meant to be. I turned off the lights and locked the door behind me, the brass plaque gleaming in the hallway. Caldwell and Associates, protecting widows and families. Tomorrow, Olivia and I would drink coffee and talk about whatever important thing she needed to say. Thursday, we'd share Thanksgiving, just the 2 of us cooking in her tiny kitchen, rebuilding what we'd almost destroyed. And Monday, Mrs. Whitmore and I would start preparing her defense. The real work was just beginning. But for the first time in a very long time, I was ready. I arrived at Blue Bottle Coffee on Linden Street 15 minutes early, ordered a latte I was too nervous to drink, and sat by the window watching Hayes Valley wake up. 22 years. That's how long it had been since Olivia and I had coffee like this. Just the 2 of us, no agenda, no argument, waiting to explode. At exactly 10 o'clock, she walked in. I almost didn't recognize her. She'd gained weight, healthy weight, the kind that comes from eating instead of surviving. Her face had color. She wore a simple professional dress and carried herself differently, steadier, calmer. And when she saw me, she smiled. A real smile. The first genuine smile I'd seen on my daughter's face in years. We met halfway across the cafe and hugged for a long time. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. "Hi, sweetheart." We sat across from each other, and for a moment, neither of us knew how to start. Then Olivia laughed, nervous, but real, and it broke the ice. "Mom, I've been going to therapy twice a week since the verdict. It's hard. Really hard. Tell me about it." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I'm working as an accountant for a small firm in the Mission District, $3,200 a month. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work." I nodded, doing the math. After taxes, rent, and the $1,875 she owed me monthly, she had almost nothing left. "I'm living in a one-bedroom apartment," she continued. "I cut off most of my old friends, the ones who were toxic, and I joined a support group for adult children who've lost parents." "How is that?" "Hard," she said again. "But good. I'm learning how to just be Olivia, not Judge Caldwell's daughter, not William Bennett's kid, just me." My eyes filled. "I'm so proud of you." She looked down at her cup. "I don't know if you should be. I did terrible things, Mom. You're doing the work now. That's what matters." She took a breath. "Mom, I'm thinking about going back to law school, but this time it'll be different." I tensed slightly. "Tell me." "Golden Gate University. Evening program so I can keep working. Not Stanford, not for prestige. And I want to practice family law, helping families like ours. Families that are broken and trying to heal. Not to be Judge Caldwell's daughter." She met my eyes. "To be Olivia Bennett attorney, on my own terms. If I fail as myself. If I succeed, it's my success. Mine." I had to press my napkin to my eyes. "That's the bravest thing you've ever said." "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But therapy is teaching me that being terrified doesn't mean I shouldn't try." We talked for 2 hours. About William, about the videos she'd re-watched the night before, about the regret she carried like stones in her pockets. "I wish I'd been there when Dad died," she said quietly. "That's something I'll carry forever. Your father forgave you before you needed forgiveness," I told her. "He knew you were struggling. He understood. My therapist says the same thing, that I have to learn to forgive myself even if I never forget." She smiled sadly. "It's a process. Your father would be so proud of who you're becoming." "I hope so." At noon, she glanced at her phone. "I should get going. I have a shift this afternoon." We stood and she hugged me again. "Tomorrow at my place," she said. 2:00. Fair warning, I've never cooked a turkey before." I laughed. "Neither have I. We'll figure it out together." That's nice. Figuring things out together." "Yeah," I whispered. "It really is." I returned to the office that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in months. Emily was waiting at her desk, surrounded by case files. "How did it go?" "We're going to be okay," I said. Finally. She smiled. "Good, because Mrs. Whitmore's trial is in 2 weeks and we have work to do." We spent the afternoon building our case. Hospital visitor logs showing Mrs. Whitmore's devotion. Financial records proving her stepson had borrowed and never repaid $60,000 from his father. Text messages showing the stepson had barely contacted his father in the last 5 years. It was my case all over again, except this time I was the one fighting back. "We'll expose his greed," I said, making notes. "Show the jury that he ignored his father for years and only showed up when there was money involved." Emily nodded. "And we emphasize Mrs. Whitmore's dedication. Every hospital visit, every meal she cooked, every night she sat by his bedside." "Exactly." My phone rang. Mrs. Whitmore's name flashed on the screen. "Judge Caldwell, Aji," she said, her voice shaking. "What if I lose? What if they take everything? I won't have anywhere to go." "Mrs. Whitmore." I interrupted gently. 2 months ago, I was exactly where you are. Terrified. Alone. Fighting my own daughter in court. And now I'm here on the other side, trust me. We're going to fight and we're going to win. You're not alone anymore. She let out a shaky breath. Thank you. Thank you so much. Emily and I worked late into the evening, the lights of San Francisco glowing below our 23rd floor window. We ordered takeout spread documents across every surface and built a defense that would have made me proud 30 years ago. At 10 o'clock, Emily finally stretched and yawned. I should head home. Big day tomorrow, Thanksgiving with my chaotic family. Olivia's cooking for me. I said, smiling. Neither of us has any idea what we're doing. Sounds perfect. After she left, I stood at the window for a while looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, Olivia was probably panicking about tomorrow's turkey. Somewhere out there, Mrs. Whitmore was trying to sleep despite her fear. And somewhere out there, other women were facing the same battles I'd fought alone, terrified, dismissed. But they wouldn't have to fight alone anymore. I locked the office door behind me, the brass plaque gleaming in the hallway light, Caldwell & Associates, protecting widows and families. As I rode the elevator down to the street, I realized something profound. I'd spent 22 years being Mrs. William Bennett, the perfect wife, the devoted mother. I'd spent 2 months becoming Judge Caldwell again, the brilliant legal mind, the courtroom warrior. But for the first time in my life, I was simply Diana. A mother, a lawyer, a fighter, a woman. Not one or the other, all of it. Messy and beautiful and finally completely whole. I climbed 3 flights of stairs in Olivia's Mission District apartment building, carrying a store-bought pumpkin pie we'd laughed about over the phone. My knees protested 63-year-old knees don't love walk-ups, but my heart felt lighter than it had in months. I knocked. The door opened. Olivia stood there wearing an old apron, Williams apron, the one with faded barbecue sauce stains from 1,000 summer cookouts. I burst into tears. "Mom," she pulled me inside. "What's wrong?" "That apron I managed. Your father wore it every—" "I know." She hugged me tight. "I found it in the boxes you gave me. I wanted something of his here today." We stood in her tiny entryway holding each other, crying over a piece of fabric that smelled faintly of him, Old Spice and coffee and home. The apartment was small but warm. IKEA furniture, potted plants on the windowsill, and a turkey, an actual turkey, roasting in the oven, filling the space with the smell of Thanksgiving. On the refrigerator held by a magnet was a photograph, the 3 of us, from 2010. William's arm around me, Olivia between us, all of us laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. We looked happy. We'd been happy. "I found it in Dad's office boxes," Olivia said softly, following my gaze. "I wanted to remember the good times, not just the pain." I touched the photo gently. "We had so many good times." "Yeah," her voice cracked. "We really did." "Okay," Olivia said, wiping her eyes and turning practical. "I need help with this turkey. I have no idea what I'm doing." I laughed. "Neither do I. It's been 10 years since I cooked one." "Great. So we're both winging it." "Completely." We spent the next hour in her tiny kitchen, bumping into each other, burning the rolls, salvaging them, laughing until we cried. It felt like something we should have been doing for years, just cooking together, being mother and daughter without all the weight. Then the doorbell rang. Olivia frowned. I thought it was just us. She opened the door. Emily Watson stood there holding a bottle of wine and smiling. "Olivia invited me yesterday," Emily said, looking at me. "I hope that's okay, Diana." "Emily..." I crossed the room and hugged her. "Of course it's okay." A few minutes later, another knock. Marcus appeared carrying a covered dish. "Aunt Diana," he said, grinning. "Olivia reached out, said you might need more family today. I brought my famous cranberry sauce." I was crying again, happy tears this time. "Marcus..." One more knock. I opened the door. Mrs. Dorothy Ellen Parker stood there holding a casserole dish and raising an eyebrow. "Olivia called me," she said. "Told me you were cooking Thanksgiving and needed an expert. Lord knows you need help, dear." The room erupted in laughter. I hugged her fiercely. "Can we start over?" "We already have, Diana." We squeezed around Olivia's tiny table, mismatched chairs, chipped plates, a slightly dry turkey, mashed potatoes, Marcus's cranberry sauce, and my store-bought pie. It wasn't fancy. It was perfect. Before we ate, Olivia stood. Her hands were shaking slightly. "I want to say something." The room fell quiet. A year ago, before Dad died, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything. She looked at me. 6 months ago, I thought Mom had stolen everything from me. 3 months ago in that courtroom, I realized I was the one who'd been stealing, taking Mom's love for granted, taking Dad's patience, taking everything good and destroying it. Her voice broke. Mom, you taught me that failure doesn't make you weak. Giving up makes you weak. You never gave up on me, even when I gave up on myself, even when I deserved to be given up on. I was crying openly now. So was Emily. Even Marcus looked misty-eyed. This year, I'm grateful for second chances, for truth, for therapy that's really, really hard but helping me see myself clearly for the first time. She smiled at our little group. Thank you, Emily, Marcus, Mrs. Parker, but mostly thank you, Mom, for being Judge Caldwell when I needed a warrior, and for being just Mom when I needed forgiveness. For you, Mom, for the memory of Dad, and for family, whether we're born into it or choose it ourselves. She raised her glass. To family. To family, we chorused clinking glasses, crying and laughing all at once. After dinner, Olivia fell asleep on her couch, exhausted from cooking and emotion. I covered her with a blanket and stood looking at the photograph on her refrigerator, the three of us frozen in a moment of joy. Emily and Marcus were doing dishes, talking and laughing. Mrs. Parker was packing up leftovers, and Olivia slept peacefully, finally at rest. I thought about William, about the locked drawer, about the key he'd left me, not just the brass key to his desk, but the key to remembering who I'd always been. Thank you, I whispered to him silently, for believing I was more than I believed I was. My phone buzzed. An email from another widow needing help, another Barbara Whitmore somewhere facing her own battle. I smiled and saved it for Monday. Tonight, I was just Mom, just Diana. Just enough. They say you can't go home again. But sitting in my daughter's small apartment surrounded by this strange and beautiful family we'd built from broken pieces, I realized something. Home was never a place. Not the mansion in Pacific Heights. Not my chambers at the courthouse. Not even William's arms, though I missed them every day. Home was this messy and imperfect and hard one. I'd been Judge Diana Caldwell for 12 years, Mrs. William Bennett for 21. Just a housewife in a courtroom full of people who thought they knew me. But the truth, I'd always been all of it. Mother and warrior, wife and judge. A woman who could love fiercely and fight even more fiercely when necessary. William had known. He'd left that key, those documents, that letter, because he knew someday I'd need to remember. Not who I'd been, but who I'd always been underneath everything. And Olivia, my beautiful, wounded, healing daughter. She'd needed to see her mother be both, not one or the other. Both. The housewife who could become a judge when her family needed protection. The judge who could put down the gavel and just be Mom when her daughter needed to be held. Most importantly, I had always been enough. I just forgot. William whispered it for 43 years. Olivia screamed it in that courtroom. And now, finally, I believed. I looked around at Emily and Marcus laughing over dishes, at Dorothy packing food, at Olivia sleeping peacefully. This was my family. Chosen and blood-broken and healing, perfectly imperfect. This was home. If my story touched your heart, I hope you'll share it. Not because it's extraordinary, but because it's not. There are women everywhere. Mothers, wives, widows, daughters who've been called just something. Just a housewife. Just a mom. Just a woman. Tell them this. You are not just anything. You are everything. Warrior and nurturer. Strong and soft. Past, present, and future. And it's never too late. Never too late to remember. Never too late to fight. Never too late to come home to yourself. I'm Diana. I'm 63 years old. And today, for the first time in my life, I finally know who I am. Looking back at my family drama story, I see a woman who almost lost everything because she forgot one truth you cannot pour from an empty cup. Don't make my mistake. Don't sacrifice so completely that you disappear. Don't let others, even those you love, define your worth by what you give up rather than who you are. This family drama story taught me that being enough doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty. With yourself first, then with those you love. My family revenge stories often end in destruction. Mine could have too: Olivia's lawsuit, the forgery, the lies. But God's grace gave us something revenge never could: reconciliation. Not because we deserved it, but because we finally chose truth over pride. Here's what I learned from this painful family revenge story. Resentment grows in silence. Communication, real, hard, ugly communication, is the only cure. If Olivia and I had talked honestly 20 years ago, we might have avoided this courtroom nightmare. To every woman reading this, you are not just anything. You are a warrior and a nurturer. You can be both. You must be both. And it's never too late to remember who you truly are. Diana Frances Caldwell, Bennett, age 63. Thank you for walking with me through every twist and turn of this journey. I'd love to hear your perspective. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were Diana facing her daughter's lawsuit, or if you were Olivia? Drowning under a parent's shadow, your insights matter to me. If this family drama story resonated with you, whether it stirred anger, empathy, or reflection, please consider subscribing so you won't miss future family revenge stories and the complex human truths they reveal. A gentle note: while inspired by real-world themes of inheritance disputes and parent-child conflict, certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling impact. If this particular family revenge stories doesn't align with your preferences, feel free to explore other content that speaks to you. Thank you for being here. Your time and attention mean everything.
That's how it ends. Thank you for watching my video. See you in the next time.